Okay, friends. So last 1 month or so has not been that great for the Kiwi-Indian community. There has been some not so good comments by a government minister. Then suddenly Immigration New Zealand reversed their long-standing policy on culturally arranged partnership visas. And then government reopened the parent visa category, but the threshold has been about 2-3 times the New Zealand median income. And across all that, there has been a perception in some quarters that the only Indian origin MP in the ruling dispensation, Priyanca Radhakrishnan, has been largely absent from the public eye. So we are right now at her Onehanga's office and we'll talk to her about all this. So we jump straight into that. So Priyanka ji, thank you for having this talk.
Yeah, my pleasure.
What do you
Thanks
have
for
to?
coming over.
Our pleasure. So let's start with the perception.
Yeah,
Have
sure.
you been invisible?
I would actually be quite interested to find out where this perception of invisibility has come from, because my standpoint has always been, any questions you want to know from me, ask me and I'll tell you, and that's always been my stand, and I stick with it.
So I'll tell you where the perception comes from, because in the last 1.5 years you haven't released any press release, you haven't given any interviews. So are you saying
that's
media?
actually not true.
Not true.
I push back a little bit on
Okay,
that.
please.
So there's been, you might remember when there was the whole issue with international students who had been sent back. This was before the coalition government came into office, where we had said the previous government probably shouldn't have deported some of those students. They should have looked at reassessing their qualifications, and then because I've been very vocal about the fact that we need to clean up the exploitation that a lot of international students have been subjected to, and migrant work exploitation. Those are things I've been very vocal about. So anyway, there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes even once we took office. Of course, the students had been deported, so what we could do was limited. But I'll get to the point that I wanted to make was that there was a press release that was sent once the Ombudsman's report was out and the minister was actually reconsidering some of
I'm talking about the last
applications.
1.5 2 months, not the last 2 years.
You did say the last year and a half,
So,
but
so let's talk about last 2 months.
yeah, sure. So in terms of press releases, I mean, a lot of the issues, so there were a couple of issues as you outlined with the immigration, largely in the immigration space, predominantly. Those are issues that have been dealt with by the immigration minister and the prime minister. Now, as a member of parliament, a Labour member of parliament, who's outside the government, I do a lot of my work directly with the ministers because they're my colleagues and the prime minister. I wouldn't issue press releases and so on and so forth because comment on immigration is the purview of the immigration minister. So that wouldn't be appropriate for me to do. However, when I've been asked about issues, to do with either the parent category or the issue around culturally arranged marriages, I've been very clear about what my views are.
So even if there is a perception, we are clearing it today.
Yeah,
right?
there you go.
Okay, let's jump.
Ask me the questions and I'll answer.
Okay, so let's jump straight into the issues.
Yeah, sure.
The government has recently, in the last 2 weeks or so, have claimed that they have fixed the culturally arranged partnership visa issue. The press release that we got mentioned fixed. Right? I have a specific question on that because, again, lots of commentators have pointed to this very paragraph in the release. They are saying, I'll quote, including the facilitation of selection of persons to be married being done by people who are not parties to the marriage. Some people have, so it essentially is saying that they will recognize culturally arranged partnership marriages only when the parents are arranging it. But now there's lots of marriages, majority happens like families actually let boys and girls meet. They go out on few dates and they like each other. They go back to their parents and say, okay, fine, we want to get married. So there is some confusion. What happens in cases like this?
Well, that, to my mind, that would be an arranged marriage because the introduction was made by parties outside of the two that are involved. And I know that sometimes it's the family, sometimes it's the parents, sometimes it's a third party. But to my mind, look, I'd have to clarify the detail with the minister, but from what you've read out there, the way I would interpret it is that anyone outside of the two.
So there is no need for the confusion, but you can always clarify with the minister.
I'm happy to clarify.
Okay, great. My third question is, your government colleague or whatever, Shane Jones has come up with lots of statements which have not gone too well with the community, right?
Yeah.
Immigration Minister has said he is not responsible for the minister, Shane Jones. PM has said not the stand of my party. But nobody has said that this is hugely offensive.
Yeah.
Last year, when Donald Trump called some countries shithole countries, PM actually went on AM show and said, it's a hugely offensive comment. She actually elaborated. She said, what will New Zealanders feel if something like that was said for us? So she finds a comment by American president hugely offensive, but she doesn't find that series of comments by her own cabinet minister offensive at all.
I can't answer for the Prime
Exactly.
Minister, but I can tell you what I think.
Exactly.
So, and
I'll ask this to the PM, but what do you think?
I have been on record, by the way, so just going back to the comment about invisibility, I've been on both, I think it was probably all three, Apna Hum and Radio Tarana, soon after that comment was made, where I was asked for my opinion on this, and I said that I find it offensive. So
do you find St. John's comments offensive?
I have been on record. I'm a migrant. I'm of Indian origin myself. I don't agree with his comment, and I'm on record having gone further. And I've talked about why I think it's actually these are comments that he probably made in the heat of the moment or flippant or whatever. I'm not justifying them, but the thing is, the reason that it's there's no place for comments like that, there shouldn't be, is because when you tell a whole group of people to go back to where you come from, which, to be fair, he's not the first person who said that. This has happened, over numerous times. And the implication or the assumption there is that the people you're talking to are not New Zealanders. I find that problematic because we have second, third, fourth, fifth generation Kiwi-Indians here. And if you're telling them, many of them want arranged marriages as well. There's nothing wrong with that. My parents had an arranged marriage. They've been happily married for many years. The choice is important. Now, I've worked with cases where the claim was it's an arranged marriage, but it was forced. So there is a distinction there. As long as there's choice involved and both parties want to enter into that marriage, nothing wrong with it. Telling people who are New Zealanders that they should go home if they're not happy with something sends two messages. One, that if you don't, look a certain way perhaps, you're not considered a New Zealander, problematic. The other thing that it says is that, you're still considered migrants and you cannot raise your voice if you're unhappy with something. Also problematic.
So I'm glad that somebody is coming out and saying that those comments were offensive. And I'll ask this to Immigration Minister and the PM as well.
Sure.
I'll go to the second last question. That is about the parents category visa. Of course, I understand the government has opened that category, reopened that category, I should say. But the threshold is very high. And that threshold, in my mind, is deeply, not only elitist, it's deeply patriarchal. Because lots of women actually take a break from work because they want to raise a family, raise a children. So, invariably, every parent that will come to New Zealand now will be the parent of the male partner. Because women will not have that kind of money, because we know gender pay gap is there and they take a break.
And there's an ethnic gender pay gap.
Yes, ethnic, exactly. So, what's your opinion on that?
Look, I totally understand where you're coming from. As you mentioned when you started your question, this is a category that was essentially closed by the previous government. They claim now they were going to reopen it, but there were no signs of that at that point. So yes, the government, the coalition government reopened that. You may also be aware, and I have said this before as well, that anything that needs to go through cabinet with the coalition government, if it's not in the coalition agreement or the confidence and supply agreement, needs to be negotiated, which means any one of the parties can
have their
spoke
say.
in it, basically. Well, all parties.
I understand all
say.
that. My question is, isn't it patriarchal as well?
The answer that I will give you, though, is that this was what was negotiated. Right? So whether we agree with it or disagree with it, it was between a much higher threshold, and that New Zealand has taken credit for that.
I understand that. Can I say
it
that
was that or nothing?
So if in the next election you get a majority, this will go?
This,
If I understand it correctly, it's because of New Zealand First being part of the government. So if you get a majority, will this go?
what I will say is that every party will be creating its own manifesto in the lead up to the election.
Okay.
So there are processes. I can't speak for the other parties, but with Labour, we have a democratic process for people who are Labour members to have a say in terms of what our policies should look like.
So this will form part of those discussions?
I would expect it to.
Okay. I want, and the discussion in the public discourse has got personal as well around this. Lots of people have said you don't care because your parents are already here. What's the truth about that?
Well, I lost my mother this year, and that was actually in the public domain as well. So that is, I guess, falls from that perspective itself. But my father still lives in India, so that's
So
it's untrue that I have parents here. Yeah, but frankly, that shouldn't. People get personal because I guess we are there in. We're public figures, whether we like it or not. I don't agree that politics should get personal. I think you should discuss the issues and not
get personal.
And not get personal. I don't think there's any reason for that. That's not how I do politics.
Okay.
But I can't stop anyone from saying what they want to say.
So, my last question is, you have done something, all women leaders across the world have done something nice last week when you were in Nairobi for the summit.
Right.
You represented New Zealand Parliament. How was that experience?
It was really good. So there were 3 of us who went from the New Zealand Parliament, including Minister Portal Williams. She was the government representative. I was there because I chair a cross-party group in Parliament called NZPPD, and that's the New Zealand group for parliamentarians for population development. So that's the group, and that's why I was there. The point of the Nairobi summit was that it's 25 years since the International Conference on Population and Development was held in Cairo. That was the first opportunity for countries, and I think it was about 180 countries that came together to make specific commitments to advance the status of women and women's sexual health and reproductive rights. And this was an opportunity in Nairobi to renew those commitments. So our government renewed our commitments to advance all those rights for women, and that includes things like access to contraception, safe abortions, and ending violence against women, including traditional harmful practices, which is a UN term that includes female genital mutilation and forced marriage, an issue that I've worked on for years because it happens in our country, in New Zealand here. So it was really good. There was a side program for parliamentarians. There were 170 of us from different countries. It's also a really good opportunity to make connections with parliamentarians from different countries as well. But most importantly, it was about renewing those commitments, and certain countries that chose not to renew those commitments. So for me, what it really brought to the fore is that the global environment that we're in now, as you see shifts towards more conservative governments, you also, across the world, you see rights being impinged both for migrants, so because right-wing conservative governments tend to clamp down on immigration and paint it as a bad thing, and also more control of women's bodies and women's rights. That is worrying. So you need, there was a sense at that conference that progressive countries need an alliance to come together to fight for women's rights and migrant rights.
So are you proud of what the summit has achieved?
I am. Also, the last point that I'll make was that there was a new alliance launched called the Global Parliamentarians for, I forget, it's a long name, Global Parliamentarians for Sexual Health and Rights or something like that. Helen Clark spoke at that, gave us New Zealand MPs a bit of a shout out, which was great. But it was an alliance, a formal alliance that was launched for us to come together and push back on the pushback. Really. So it was great. Can I just say one last thing?
Please.
While we were in Nairobi, there was actually quite a significant step that was taken in the New Zealand Parliament here to address FGM, female genital mutilation. That doesn't affect our communities, but the wider communities in New Zealand. Now, it's been in the Crimes Act for many years, but there's been a bill that was tabled in Parliament to expand the definition in the Crimes Act so that we actually criminalise all forms of FGM and not just some. It's in accordance with the WHO guidelines. What was a standout is the way that this bill was tabled. It's a multi-member bill, which is the first time in political history in New Zealand.
People across the parties came together.
One person from each of the main parties. It's a my name from Labour. Gaurav from the Greens. We've got Jenny Markroft from New Zealand First and Joanne Hayes from National. And so that will be read when we go back to Parliament for the first time.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So thank
great.
you. Thank you very much for talking to us
Not at all.
and for fronting up.
Thanks for actually asking me some questions.
Cheers.